Well, it's so good having you all with us today. My name is Chris, and we're in the third part of the series, Crazy Love. And before we just jump in, I just want to let you know, this is going to be a PG-13 message. So, hey, parents, you know your kids, you know the age of your kids, and you know what your kids know and don't know. So if you're connected at one of our physical campuses, just know we have amazing Kids Rock environments where we teach kids to their age level. So you have a few moments, go check them in. You can come back, you won't miss too much. And if you don't, well, I've warned you. Now, every part of this series, I've shared a picture from Kim's and my wedding day, and this is like the official wedding day picture. We were so young, we were so in love, and we thought we knew what marriage was going to look like. We thought we knew how the marriage journey was going to be, and I'm just letting you know, some 26 years later, to be exact, 9,647 days later, we've discovered a whole lot about what marriage really is. We've had some mountaintop experiences and some really dark valleys, but together, and that's the key word, we have journeyed life, marriage together. And we said the words that if you've ever been married, you are married, you've said these words. We said, till death do us part. And that's our goal. That's our pursuit. And honestly, this is what I want for you. Whether you're looking to get married, you are married, or you're thinking about getting married again, my prayer and desire is that you actually will experience a marriage, a relationship, a friendship with someone where you can have death do us part. But in our reality, and you know this, over 50% of all marriages end in divorce. And there's so much pain, fractured relationships, hurt that comes with divorce. So in Crazy Love, I'm sharing with you 4 very specific actions because I don't want you to go through divorce or through divorce again. I want you to experience that death do us part moment in your marriage, in your relationship. So part 1, we looked at the first action. It was to seek first. It's all about joining God in what God's doing, His purpose, and His righteousness to pursue His character. Action number 2 we looked at in part 2 was all about serving selflessly. In fact, the Apostle Paul talked about to submit to one another. It's a mutual submission competition that if we as husband and wives go to serve each other, something powerful happens within the marriage. And all of that leads to this third action where we're going to today. Now, what's interesting is the Apostle Paul, what we looked at in part 2, in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, is where he wrote these words, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And that's where we anchored part 2. Well, if you go to the very beginning of chapter 5, well, Paul gives some other really specific insights, which really starts to reveal the third action. The third action is this. We have to set guardrails in our marriage. What do I mean by that? Well, we'll get there in a moment. Like I mentioned, and in the very beginning of chapter 5, Paul writes these words. He goes, follow God's example. Now that word example means be imitators. And what I love about the Apostle Paul, he takes basically what Jesus taught, and he just writes these letters to people, to churches, that just circles around and gives different angles and different perspectives to what Jesus taught. Think about this. Part 1, we looked at Jesus' word, seek first His kingdom and His righteousness. And Paul just writes it this way. Oh, by the way, imitate God. I mean, isn't that seeking first God, seeking His righteousness? He goes, be an imitator of who God is, what He's passionate about, and His character. Paul goes, imitate God, not one another, but imitate God. Therefore, as dearly loved children. And then he goes, and walk in the way of love. Walk in that. The pathway that God has called us to follow His footsteps in is a crazy type of love. It's a love like this world has never seen before. It's a type of love that I would have never have come up with on ourselves, but God fully embodied. What's this crazy type of love? Well, Paul tells us, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. A completely selfless love that Jesus fully embodied. And Paul is saying specifically to you, to me, hey, walk in this way of love. It's almost like you can hear Paul saying, hey, I love you. And what I'm going to say next is going to be but I'm saying it out of love. And I want you to hear me say this to you. Where we're going today is going to create some tension within you. And my prayer is that tension gets your attention. But more than your attention, I pray that it actually moves you in a different direction. Ultimately, this is what about seeking God first, his righteousness, his kingdom, his purpose. It's what Paul's saying, hey, walk in the way of love. I love you, but I'm going to create some tension. Now, I just want to give this warning. Some of the things I share today, you're going to think to yourself, how in the world does that guy, how in the world does Chris know my story? Who told Chris what I'm going through? Who told Chris my life moment, my life example, what I'm struggling with? Who told him? How does he know? I don't. But God does. And the instruction Paul gives us, I'm just telling you, is just, whether you're married or not, if you're a Christ follower, this is how we should live. But we're going to lens this through marriage. Because if we actually live out, if we actually allow the tension that's going to be created to get our attention and moves us into a different direction. What direction? To walk in the pathway that God has laid. To walk in the path of love. Why? Because God knows us the best and he wants the best for us. So lean into the tension. Allow it to get your attention. And my prayer that it moves you in a different direction. And that direction is towards God, a God who deeply loves you. So you ready? Here we go. But among you, there must not even be a hint, a skosh, a percentage, nada. Paul's just like setting the bar as high. He's like, not even a hint. And then he's going to give us a list. We'll get to that in a moment. And then he goes, because these are improper for God's holy people. Again, we're going to lens this through marriage. But if you're dating, this is for you. If you are a Christ follower, this is for you. And what was the list? Well, these three things. Sexual immorality, impurity, greed. Now, think about this list for a moment. Think about this list. This list, right? This list. And already, I know some of you are feeling the tension. But again, this is love. Paul's saying, I love you. And I want you again to hear me say, man, I love you. And God has a framework in which we are to live. That's why Jesus' word, seek God, his kingdom, his purpose, and his righteousness. Our pursuit is to live a life reflecting God's character. And here's what we know. In marriage, these three areas destroy marriages. These three areas lead to divorce. These three areas has created so much brokenness. And if we put the right guardrails around them, it's going to help our marriages go the distance till death do us part. So, when we think about the first one, sexual immorality, some of you are thinking to yourself, you had this thought right when I said the word sex. You had this thought. The Bible is outdated and was written so long ago. Chris, come on. That's an old book. We're so much more advanced today. It was different back then. I believe the entire Bible, but some of that stuff is just outdated. And I would tell you, not at all. You see, one of the biggest issues that you find throughout the Old Testament, especially connected to the Israelites, was this whole idea of, well, sexual immorality. In fact, when God led his people, the Israelites, into the promised land, part of the issue is the Canaanites who lived there before, they had this pagan religion that all of a sudden the Israelites started to adopt for themselves. And it's the worship of two gods, the god of Baal and the goddess of Asherah. Baal was the storm god. Asherah was the fertility goddess. And what they believed was, well, in seasons of drought, that they needed rain. Why? Because rain was good for the crops, which gave them food, which allowed them to live. And so when there were seasons of drought, they would shift their focus from worshiping God, trusting God, to worshiping Baal and Asherah. And in this pagan cultic belief system is that, well, if they had sex with temple prostitutes, Asherah, the fertility goddess, they could convince Baal, the storm god, and Asherah, the fertility goddess, to have sex together, which would bring the rain. It was a powerful combination of the demand for rain, which would keep them alive, and the desire for sex. And this wreaked havoc within God's people. And then you make your way in the New Testament, guess what? I mean, the Greco-Roman world, it was kind of a free-for-all. If you've ever heard about what took place in Roman bathhouses, I won't get into the details here, but I'm just telling you, no, it's no different today than it was 2,000, 6,000 years ago. And what we have to recognize, and the Bible talks about it, is that, well, sex is good. Why? Because it was created by God. And what God creates is good. And that sex, created by God, in the context, in the framework in which God created it, when God talked about the two becoming one, there's not a more powerful image than sex between husband and wife, joining two people together as one. And what our culture is screaming to us, and what some of you have convinced yourselves, is that sex is just physical, it's just body. And what God says, it's so much more than that. It's body and soul. That sex is not just physical, it's spiritual, it's emotional, it's mental. And our culture has tried to scream, hey, it's just a physical act. It's not a big deal. For some of you, for all of you, you know it's so much more. And that's why God said, no, wait until marriage. Within marriage, it unites two people as one. And outside of that, for some of you, you're in a relationship right now that you know is so unhealthy. But because you've chosen to have sex before marriage, now you're united as one. And to remove yourself from that relationship, to distance yourself, to break up from that relationship, you're not just connected physically, you're connected at a spiritual level. And that's why God says, no, wait. Within marriage, it's beautiful. Outside of that, you're going to create so much brokenness. That's why the Bible talks about it all the time. Why there's guardrails around to say, hey, God created it, it's good, but it's good for husband and wife, for marriage. Now, one of the big, commands out there in the Bible is do not commit adultery. And for some of you, you know the impact of adultery. Maybe you're still in a marriage where your husband or your wife committed adultery, and you had to fight through the healing process to try to just save the marriage. For some of you, you're in that process right now. For some of you, you got divorced because of adultery, and you know the impact. Well, one of the things Jesus does in Matthew chapter 5, he kind of just elevates it, and he kind of goes, well, yeah, adultery, yep, that's sin. And oh, by the way, lust is too. What you look at. My dad, as I was a young man, he said to me, hey, son, the first look isn't sin. The first look isn't lust. It's the second one. It was such a simple insight that has forever stuck with me because he's right. The first one is never the sin. It's when you look back the second time or the third time. And we're living in a day and age where just looking is everywhere. Pornography, social media, what the images that just pop up, and Sometimes you're not even looking for them. They just hit your feed, and it is everywhere. And researchers, more and more research is coming out on the damage that pornography is doing to the brain and to relationships, all relationships, let alone marriage. And I just want to pause there, because if you're struggling with a pornography addiction, you got to know there's a great resource. A friend of mine runs xxchurch.com. That's xxxchurch.com. And I just want you to know, it's such a great resource for you. You can join a group. You can talk with someone confidentially. There's some filters to be put on your phone, your computers, right, to bring some accountability. Because again, the damage to you personally, but the damage to your relationships is staggering. And that's why we need to put guardrails when it comes to sexual immorality in our relationships. Here's a few guardrails that Kim and myself have put into our relationship. The first guardrail is this: she has complete access to my phone. I have complete access to her phone. She has my passwords. I have her passwords. At any time, she can grab my phone, look at my text messages, look at my search history. She can look at it all. It's all there. Nothing's locked. Nothing's hidden. Whenever I hear a married couple go, well, yeah, I don't have access to, I'm like, red flag. Why? Because guardrails are all about protecting yourself and protecting your marriage. And so Kim and I we have a password manager called 1Password, where every password's there. She can look up any account and get access to it. Nothing's locked, nothing's hidden. She has full access. Another guardrail that we have in our marriage is location. We have iPhones, and on iPhone, there's this app called Find My iPhone. And at any point, she knows exactly where I'm at. When I'm on the road traveling, she could wake up at 2 a.m., grab her phone, and know where I am. And you might be thinking, well, Chris, that doesn't sound like a trusting relationship. No, it's actually all about trust. I have nothing to hide. And I don't want to get to a point where I'm trying to hide things. So we just keep everything open. She knows where I am at. I know where she's at. She knows she can get access anytime to my phone. I can get access to her. This is about trust. And oh, by the way, guardrails help protect us before we go over the cliff. And here's what I know. I'm one decision away from ruining my marriage. I'm one decision away from losing all the respect for my kids. And I'm one decision away from really hurting the churches God has called me to lead. So guess what? This is all about trust. All about me saying, hey, honey, I want to have guardrails in place. Another guardrail that we got from some good friends years and years and years ago, she gets to interview every person I hire. Now it might sound weird, but what they said to me is, your wife has intuition, and she knows you, Chris. This isn't awkward. This isn't weird. No one ever knows we're doing this. We don't make a big deal about it. Well, now you all know. But somewhere in the interviewing process, she is involved relationally, and she has absolute veto rights. Again, we've done this for decades. No one ever knows. But you do now. It's a guardrail. And when it comes to our relationships, this is years ago, we were in a life group, a small group. And all of a sudden, one night, we're driving home, and Kim looked at me and said, hey, that guy, that husband, just makes me feel creepy. And we talked a lot about it. And over the next couple weeks, couple months, I can't remember the exact timeline, but we talked more and more. And I started looking at a small group, and it was really weird because it was a church small group. And we decided to gracefully, we didn't make a big deal, we didn't throw relational grenades, we just kind of distanced ourselves and found a new life group. Years later, that same guy has an affair, commits adultery with another lady in a life group. And I've often thought about that moment. I'm so glad I listened to my wife. I'm so glad that we together had the conversation and we distance ourselves. These are guardrails. What guardrails do you need put in place in your marriage? All that leads to the second thing that Paul talks about is impurity. This word impurity is like literally a big banner that means morally unclean. It covers everything. And I was thinking about like all the things that are just morally impure that makes us unclean. The word that just slammed in my mind is addiction. And so many times when we think about addiction, we think about alcohol, we think about drugs, we think about pain medications, right? Like the big addictions. But then I started thinking through all the other ones, because all of us, right, are sinful, broken, messy people. We're all a few, decisions away from having addictions within us. And again, so many times the spotlight, and again, the impact of alcohol and drugs and pain, like the impact, like shrapnel that gets spread into those people connected is massive. So I'm not making light of that. But I started thinking through the other addictions that are creeping up within our society, within our culture. Like smartphones, cell phones, the endless scrolling, the amount of time, hours, the amount of emotionally disconnectedness that's happening within marriages because, dinner tables, people are scrolling, or on a date, people are scrolling, or just sitting there together. Like, we're not talking anymore, we're just scrolling. It's an addiction. The phone is powerful. Do you just need to put it away? Put it down? Ban it from the dinner table? Shopping, there's a dopamine hit that hits people when they go shopping. For some of you, your marriage is fractured because now you're in debt. Why? Because someone or someones are shopping all the time. And in the reality, it's an addiction. You focus on the money issue, and that's the real issue. The real issue is that it's the addictive side of shopping. Is that an addiction? I mean, food, sugar is one of the most addictive substances we have, and it's in everything we eat. And it's wreaking havoc on people's physical bodies. Think about it. Think about it. What addiction has wrapped its tentacles within you? What addiction is hiding in the shadows and you know it's there and it's waiting to pounce? And not only is it going to impact you, it's going to sever, fracture your marriage. So what guardrails? There's two I just want to encourage you with. One is you got to recognize it. Every one of us, me included, there's one addiction or multiple ones. It's either wrapped around you or it's waiting to pounce. You just got to recognize. And it's so easy to go, I don't deal with that addiction like that other person, but there's something there. Which leads to the second guardrail. Talk about it. My wife and I have been doing this. We'll just say, you know what, I'm going to take a break from. Hey, you know what, I'm just going to pull back from. Hey, I don't like how this is taking hold of. And we just talk about it. And we support each other. When you just bring things into light, things start to shift in a powerful way. What do you just need to bring to light? Maybe it's a counselor. Maybe it's going to XXXchurch.com and just confiding with someone that you don't even know to start to work through how do you heal? How do you break free from a pornography addiction? To talk with your husband, talk to your wife, and just say, hey, this is a struggle of mine. I'm facing it. I just want to bring you in. I want to bring it out in the light. I don't want to hide anymore. What do you need to do? And all of that leads to, greed. Greed. And this ancient Greek word literally means the desire of more. And, in our westernized culture, the number one indicator of greed in your life, the desire of more, is simply this one word, debt. And you might be wondering, okay, what are the guardrails there? Well, here's what I know. One of the leading causes of stress and tension in marriage that leads to divorce is money. So, not next week. We still have part 4 of this series left to go. But the week after that, we're going to launch a series called Money Talks. Why? Because we want to help you as couples, as husband, as wife, deal with one of the things that create the most stress within marriages. And the Bible is filled with so much incredible wisdom that, together you can start to make some decisions, some guardrails to remove that stress, to get out of debt, to position money in a way that honors God in such an incredible way, and experience, some breathing room within your marriage that's going to help your marriage thrive. So that starts in a couple of weeks. Well, the Apostle Paul goes on, and he creates some tension, and then he's going to create a little bit more tension. And, he says, he goes, but among you there must not be a hint of any sexual immorality or any kind of impurity or any kind of greed, because these aren't proper for God's holy people. And then he goes, nor Should there be any obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving? When I looked at that list, and again, I was just listening through marriage, and the Bible says so much about our words and what we say, and we did a whole series called Speakeasy about what we say. If it was this one question, do your words build up or tear down? It's a question we have asked our kids countless times. I mean, over and over and over again. But when you think about it within the marriage context, within the dating context, do your words build up or tear down? Which way do they go? Just with passing comments, when you're walking past someone and you just say that passive-aggressive thing, that thing that's been frustrating you, and you just kind of launch just a little missile, not a big missile, just a little one. You just kind of hit. Do those comments build up or tear down? You know the answer. During an argument, what you say, is this building up or tearing down? I know in our arguments, I'm so good launching the big ones, the big missiles, the big rockets. And I know the goal wasn't to build up. The goal was to tear down. When you're talking with a friend, are your words about your husband or your words about your wife, are they building them up or tearing them down? Even if you're sitting with a spiritual mentor, you can still have a very direct conversation trying to work through tension in your marriage and use words that build up and not tear down. So what are the guardrails? Here's a few of them. In our marriage, we've outlawed the D word, the divorce word. We're not 100%, but we're in the high 90 percentile. That no matter how intense the argument, we just don't launch the divorce word. Why? Because that just severs. That's not even an option for Kim and myself. It's till death do us part. And so we've just outlawed it. Again, we haven't been perfect, but we've been really close to it. Develop a don't say list. We have a list of things we can't say to each other. There's a list of things that we have asked each other. The other day, we were in an argument, and I said something. Right when I said it, Kim's eyes welled up with tears, and I just knew. And later that day, she asked me, she goes, that wasn't fair. Will you never say that again? And I can't say that I wasn't not a little bit defensive at first. Real. But the more I thought about it, I was like, yeah, it was so unfair for me to say that. Goes on the list. And it's a list that we've just agreed to say, no, we're no matter how heated the argument, those things are off limits. And then just put your mouth in timeout. We talked about that in Speakeasy. Like, you just got to put your mouth in timeout. Push pause, create some distance, allow some of that emotion, that sinful anger emotion to subside, and then come back together, have a life-giving, unifying conversation. You see, when we think about the triangle, right, action one is about seeking God, where you and your husband, you and your wife, right, seek God. It's going to grow you together. And as you seek God, his kingdom, his purpose, his righteousness, pursue his character, then you serve each other selflessly. This is mutual submission. It's going to help grow you together, which all leads to action three, is you got to set guardrails to protect your marriage. Guardrails around you and guardrails around your marriage. Like, you just got to set those, and you got to talk about them, and you got to live by them. You got to protect, other than your relationship with God, your most important relationship, and that's with your spouse. Well, the Apostle Paul, he goes on. He goes, for this you can be sure that nothing immoral, impure, or a greedy person, such a person is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. And the gravity of that statement is massive. What Paul isn't saying is if you don't get this 100% right, you don't get heaven. It's not what he's saying, right? Grace saves us. What Paul is saying here is like, hey, you got to realize the gravity of these actions is just mission critical. Don't dismiss them. Don't disregard them. Like, live this out now. And again, remember where he's going. I mean, these are for all Christ followers, but he's leading right into marriage. You have to know that Paul, yes, was writing for all Christ followers and for marriages. He's like, hey, husband and wives, this is so important for you, your relationship. He goes on, he goes, for you were once in darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. So live. This is with action. Children of the light. For the fruit of light consists of all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And find out what pleases the Lord. That's seek first God's kingdom. Seek first his righteousness. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. And that's why my encouragement for you is bring this all out into the light. Talk. Say, hey, I'm struggling with this addiction. It either has me or it wants to have me. Bring it all out into the light. Put the guardrails in where people have access to where you are, to your phone, or the other things that you want to hide behind. You're like, no, I'm just going to bring it all into the light. Because in the light, there's so much healing and so much good. It's in the darkness that destroys you and your marriage. Expose them. And then Paul writes, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity. Why? Because the days are evil. So let me leave you with this one question. What do you need to talk to? What do you need to talk to? Or who do you need to talk to? Who do you need to talk to? And what do you need to bring into the light? Have a conversation with your spouse. Have a conversation with a trusted mentor. Have a conversation with a counselor. Who do you need to talk to? And what do you need to just bring into the light? God's grace is good, sufficient for you. His love covers. And so much healing can be done. Let's set guardrails to protect the relationship that matters the most. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just ask that you'll just be with us. You'll guide us. Lord, I pray that we'll just courageously lead ourselves. We're all broken, messy, sinful people, but in the light is healing. In that light, we experience your grace, your love, and it's in the light that you can help bring relationships together, and there's no more important relationship than a marriage relationship between husband and wife. Lord, I pray for that. We do thank you for your grace and your love. In your name I pray. Amen.